We have come to that part of the week where we look at some key questions that I have received from students affecting this stage of the risk management process. Before we get to the questions, I would like to reinforce the importance of assessing risks properly. Although it can become time-consuming and cumbersome, it is really important that it is done properly to avoid any possible catastrophes that might occur as a result of hazarded approaches to assessing the identified risks. The first question is on risk assessment. How often do I do a risk assessment? This is a good question because we have looked at risk management as a process with specific stages that occur one after the other. However, during a medium or a long-term project, it is likely that some contractors or stakeholders may leave the project for any particular reason. It is also possible that new equipment may be required over the course of the project. The rule of thumb is that a risk assessment should take place every time there is a significant change in the project or in your business operations. The second question is, why do I need to record a risk assessment? It is a legal requirement to record and document your risk assessment. A clear and well-recorded risk assessment helps to show that you've done what the law requires. Recording a risk assessment helps to make sure any important hazards aren't overlooked, as well as helping to avoid any unnecessary repetition in the assessment process. A record also serves as a reminder of the priority hazards, standards to be maintained, and what action has been taken or still needs to be taken. Another question I often get asked is whether any documentation needs to be completed when identifying risks. Identified risks are usually documented in the risk register. At this early stage of risk identification, specific information needs to be included in the risk register regarding risk identification, including a description of the risk, the causes and consequences of the risk, and the existing internal controls that may reduce the likelihood or consequences of the risks. Remember that it is also essential for you to consider the factors that may contribute to a risk occurring or increasing, the likelihood of a risk occurring, and the outcomes or impacts of an event. The final question for the week is, what is meant by developing risk criteria? Risk criteria need to be identified by the project manager. The risk criteria reflects the objectives and context for the risk assessment. Adequate consideration should be given to the time and resources available, stakeholder views and perceptions, and the applicable legal and regulatory requirements. The risk criteria chosen should be continuously reviewed. When defining risk criteria for assessments, be sure to consider the categories of risks, the nature and type of the causes and consequences that can occur, and how they will be measured, how likelihood will be defined, for example, qualitatively or as a quantitative probability, the time frame, how the level of risk is to be determined, the level at which risk become acceptable or tolerable, and whether combinations of multiple risks should be taken into account and, if so, how and which combination should be considered. That's all for this week. Remember to use the forum to full advantage by involving yourself in the discussion. See you again next week.